I'm going to go ahead and test this beautiful audio. Hello.
Hello.
Got it. Hello, 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 everyone. Great present moment we are having in this great ability to experience another day of life. For life is truly, truly, truly a gift. When you come in, please say hello. You know what I mean. Like the video, sub to the channel, website realityandbalance.com. Linked in the comments is access to my volume one affirmations for a survivor, expressions of individuality. Right, right, right. So go ahead and click on that. Very inexpensive self help book of affirmations, words of power that follows. If you like my content during the week, where we do words of power, affirmations, you will love this self help book. There's about 23 to 25 different affirmation words of power in my volume one affirmations. All right. I do have volume two and volume three available. I just haven't released it yet. They definitely have a lot more words of power in volume two and volume three, but I love volume one. We're going to continue to press that as long as possible. Other than that, you guys, I'm glad that you are here experiencing this unique adventure, is what we call life. And before we get into complex PSTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker, I want to go ahead and pull a words of power affirmations from my deck that I've created. 52 words of power affirmations are here. And I want to see what the energy is going to bring us forth before we dive into chapter three. What is the energy that is representing this present moment right now? I am valued came out. All right. I am valued in number 5 and 0. So before we move on and reading like these can be so much in depth, right? Information that deals with childhood trauma, all right? Your ancestors and your spiritual guides want you to know that you have value in this present moment, in the past, in the future, but here and right now, you bring value to all environments. You bring value to every situation just by your presence. So, and then that is attached to the number 5, 0. 5 is equal enough to change in numerology, that freedom, being able to move and to flow, however and whenever. And that 0 is not undefined. That 0 gives you access to the universal concept of infinite abundance. So, I am valued, is what your ancestors and spiritual guides want you to know. Reflect on your value within. Maybe you have value outside. As long as your value from the outside, which is the surface of you, matches the value within, nothing wrong with that. Sorry, guys. So we finally finished up chapter 2 last week, Levels of Recovering, where they talked a lot about self help tools, right? Utensils, resources. All right, giving gratitude, somatic healing, somatic self help, CPTSD, and somatic therapy. What else were they talking about? Self medication, working with food issues, the role of medication, right? What else was on here? Spiritual healing was another topic that was very wide. toxic shame, and soul murder, right? Those are, he's expressing all the levels of recovering because there is not a linear stance, not a linear presence in recovering, right? Some, everyone is different in their recovery stage and their grief process. There's never a linear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step, okay? Maybe for some individuals, but not for all. And that's what chapter 2 was broadly speaking of, but more in a simplistic way of how to be aware of so many different formats to healing, right? Not only what it does to the body, the physiological aspect, but also the resources and the tools as well that one may use, or two, or three different formulations, right, with healing from complex post traumatic stress. So let's get into chapter 3. Right, chapter 3 is called Improving Relationships. Improving relationships, which I'm excited about this chapter. All right, because I think I was talking about yesterday before I was drifting off into dreamland, is that improving relationships really improves within. It starts with the self first, and it branches out and reaches to others. One best way, I'm not talking about the book right now, I'm just, thinking out loud. One best way of improving relationships is getting rid of addictions. Getting rid of addictions, right, will naturally, automatically improve your relationship with self and the relationship in your environment, the relationship between your family, your friends, your children, with strangers, right? Is ridding addictions. But I'm not here to preach and tell people how to rid their addiction, right? I'm just going to read from chapter 3, Improving Relationships. Alrighty. And if you guys give me one moment, I'm going to restart this dryer out here. So give me 1 second, please. And I'll be right back. Get some tea, get some pen and paper, right? Light a white candle, do an incense, open up the window, maybe do some stretching as you're listening to this. And I'll be right back. And give me like give me 1 minute. 1 minute. All right, you guys. Thank y'all. I promise won't keep you too long. All righty. It is currently 12:30 Pacific Standard Time on this fine, fine moment. So let's see what Pete Walker has written about improving relationships. He has a forewarning, you guys. There's a forewarning before we get into the chapter. He says, there are instances of parental betrayal so extreme that it is not fair or reasonable to expect the survivor to try to trust human beings again. If the recommendation in this chapter to open to the help of others feel too upsetting or overwhelming, please feel free to skip this chapter. There is a great deal of other materials in this book that can help alleviate the many symptoms of CPTSD. And since recovery is relative and never complete, you do not need to implement everything in this book. As they say in the 12-step movement, take the best and leave the rest. Moreover, as I have experienced personally, And as numerous of my clients and website respondents have demonstrated to me, real relational healing can and does come from non human sources. And this is especially true of mammalian pets whose attachment needs and wiring are similar enough to ours that mutually healing connections can evolve between us. Dogs and cats can be a tremendous source of what Carl Rogers describes as the unconditional positive regard that young children must have in order to thrive. Other therapeutic relational sources include nature, music, and the arts. Moreover, for some survivors, authors of helpful books can be kept at safe distances while they contribute to your healing. Finally, even with the most heinous betrayals, miracles sometimes happen in terms of discovering a healing human connection, particularly in the later stages of recovery. So now he gets into the summation beginnings of the chapter with the subtitle titled CPTSD as an attachment disorder. One second, y'all. I gotta put this in here. Sorry, you guys. I'm doing some laundry, of course, right? Okay, doing some laundry. Everything is all good now. Ay, ay, ay. All right, are you all right? So the subtitle chapter CPTSD as an attachment disorder. An attachment disorder. What is Paul Walker talking about? Let's see. Many therapists see CPTSD as an attachment disorder. This means that a child, the survivor, grew up without a safe adult to healthily bond with them. As bear repeating, CPTSD almost always has emotional neglect at its core. A key outcome of this is that the child has no one in his formative years who models the relational skills that are necessary to create intimacy. When the developmental need to practice healthy relating with a caretaker is unmet, survivors typically struggle to find and maintain healthy, supportive relationships in their adulthood. Subchapter: The origin of social anxiety. The origin of social anxiety. Let's put a pin there because I was listening to Summer Walker. She did like a little vloggy vlog and she was talking about experiencing social anxiety, which this is not a new thing because of social media. Many people have issues with being within the presence of I am socially, right? Because of the greater expectations from the outside, the perceiving from so many different levels, mainly from toxic shame, is what I'm gathering. Toxic shame, you know, the inability to receive support from a parent because all they do is yell at you, ridicule you, put you down, right? So let's get back to the subchapter, the origin of social anxiety. A child who grows up with no reliable human sources of love, support, and protection typically falls into a great deal of social unease. He naturally becomes reluctant to seek support from anyone, and he is forced to adopt self sufficiency as a survival strategy. Mm, mm. Needing anything from others can feel exceptionally dangerous. The survivor's innate capacity to experience comfort and support in relationship becomes very limited or non existent. This is despite the fact that many high functioning survivors learn to socially function quite adequately. This is particularly the case in structured situations where expectations are clear and common goals take the focus off conversing and put it on task accomplishments. Mm, like you're in class doing group work, basically. Unstructured social situations, however, like attending parties or just hanging out, can be considerably more triggering. Spontaneous self expressions feel like the same setup for disaster that it was in childhood. Either way, structure or spontaneous relating often involves hiding a great deal of anxiety and discomfort. One very successful businessman client of mine told me, "I'm so cool, calm, and collective in meetings." A veritable wordsmith with the composure of Michael Caine. I'm a king on the outside, but on the inside, I'm a drama queen, acquisitioning in doubt and shame about everything I say or do. In worst case scenarios, social anxiety can devolve into social phobia, especially during prolonged flashbacks. Extensive childhood abuse installs a powerful people are dangerous program. When I was at my least recovered, I couldn't take out the garbage when I was in a flashback. I feared that my neighbor, my sweet, always affirming neighbor, would look out the window and see how wretched and pitiful I was. Even worse, I dreaded the prospect that she might come out and want to interact with me. Nothing less. I socialized for decades when necessary and seemed to be doing it with a considerable amount of success, no matter how dreadful the reviews were from my critic. I even eventually came to see, when not in a flashback, that a lot of people really liked me. Unfortunately, however, I rarely derived any satisfaction or comfort from this perception because underneath my smooth persona, I was writhing in discomfort and typically measuring the time until I could least obtrusively make my escape. Subchapter: A Journey of Relational Healing. The incident I am about to describe marked a huge step in my long, gradual journey of opening to real intimacy. I was sitting on my porch with my dog, George, the only being I could truly relax with, when he broke his head and sprinted across the street in pursuit of a cat. Before he could get to the cat, he was run over by a car. Both axles run over. It was the worst thing that have ever happened in my adult life, and when the shock disassociation wore off, I was drowning in the abandonment melange. Beyond devastated, I felt panicky and catatonic at the same time, as I had to in childhood. When feeling overwhelmed, I hid in my room for 36 hours, dreading contact with my fair weather friend roommates. I was 28 and still thoroughly phobic about showing any vulnerability. All my relationships have been developed under the guise of my people pleasing, funny guy persona. And in my current state, there was not a joke anywhere to be found. There was no way I would let myself be seen in what felt like a repulsive condition. I could not sleep. And as sleep deprivation deteriorated into a fear that I was truly going crazy, out of nowhere came this amazing grace. Grace disguised in a form of I usually abhorred. It was the grace of a deep surrender into weeping, a long, sobbing release, more soothing than anything that I have ever experienced before. It was the release I described in chapter 11 and extensively throughout my first book. When the tears were cried out, I knew I would be okay, and I knew I was not going to go crazy. I could face my roommates with the realest, perhaps the first sense of self esteem as I had ever known. And from that point on, I knew I wanted more of these incredibly healing tears. Let's put a pin in that, because if you're with me with my last live, and we talked a lot about the form of release through water, only such because we had like five Congo cards, right? That came out for us, and we had one Petro card. All the other cards have a formulation of water, and but we stood on, through the presence of our energetic ancestors, of the formulation of releasing water, showers, drinking, expelling, body fluids. All were forms of releasing that needed to take place for healing to be vulnerable, okay, to be vulnerable with oneself and have an understanding of the things outside of us too, is this form of releasing. So I find it quite very interesting that he has gave this topic about a journey of relational healing, where his relational healing came from releasing, feeling the feeling of pain, of strain, of distress, and releasing that in a productive way. So much more productive that he's cleared blockages where he can actually socialize with the people that are around him, right? Because these people are around this individual for a reason. If they didn't like him, they wouldn't be around him. So now he's building this reciprocal relationship because of this form of releasing. And yet, this is a man speaking. Releasing and healing and crying is not just for certain particular genders, it is for all people, even for all things. We just can't conceptualize other things with releasing, like dogs and cats and trees and soil and mountains. Everything has a form of release here. What I find in this society is that vulnerability is some attachment to being weak. All right. There's no weakness when it comes to removing blockages so you can continue to connect with yourself and connect with your environment. Who's to say that you have to cry on someone's shoulder? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the whole form is accepting and releasing. As my card that came out at the beginning of this video function as, you have value. Your value outside will reflect the value within, and your value increases exponentially with being vulnerable with yourself. So, moving on, we're on page 52, and the subtitle chapter is called Healing the Shame That Binds Us in Loneliness. Healing the shame that binds us in loneliness. Okay, I still feel like he's talking about that social anxiety, right? The isolation we place ourselves in. So let's see what he has to say. Don't forget to like the video, you guys. Check out my affirmation book right here, posted, pinned here in the comments. Go ahead and click on that, all right? And if you want any more additional information about me and my life journey and path, realityandbalance.com. All right, so he's saying that I soon discovered, however, that my tears were as stuck as they had ever been, or at least since I was 6. The last time I could remember crying. Further reading and researching then led me to seek help, and so ensued my baptism into therapy. Blessed by the great fortune of finding a good enough therapist on the first try. Remember, you guys, when we were talking about good enough, this form of good enough, because there's no perfection in this so called reality, right? So the author says that had a great fortune of finding a good enough therapist on the first try. Not a perfect therapist, not the right therapist. You know what I mean? But a good enough therapist. This was a milestone achievement for me, and it evolved into a long, meandering journey of finding more relational help with an array of healers, therapists, therapeutic groups, and deeper friendships. These experiences range from extremely helpful to counter therapeutic, but but as time went on, they became increasingly helpful. A central aspect of the truly helpful relational work was what John Bradshaw called healing the shame that binds. I believe toxic shame cannot be healed without some relational help. Several therapists and groups aided me greatly to unbind from the shame that made me hide whenever I could not invoke my perfect persona. Concurrently, I learned that real intimacy correlated with the amount of shame my vulnerabilities. Oh, I'm sorry. Concurrently, I learned that real intimacy correlated with the amount I shared my vulnerabilities. As I increasingly practice emotional authenticity, the glacier of my lifelong loneliness began to melt. Once again, he says, as I increasingly practice emotional authenticity, the glacier of my lifelong loneliness began to melt. It is important to note here that groups can be even more powerful for the healing of shame than individual work. This is because there is typically more mutual vulnerability in a group than in individual work. Moreover, feeling compassion for someone who has suffered similarly to us sometimes naturally expands into feeling the same for ourselves. Therapeutic relational experiences enhance my self compassion considerably further than what I was able to accomplish on my own. Moreover, I believe that insufficient self compassion is the worst developmental arrest of all, and restored self compassion is the keystone of all effective recovery. In retrospect, I can clearly see that as my self compassion increased, my toxic shame decreased. Modern advances in neuroscience suggest that we are intrinsically limited in our ability to emotionally regulate and soothe ourselves. More and more research suggests that our ability to metabolize painful emotional states is enhanced by communicating with a safe enough other person. Let's read that last line again. More and more research suggests that our ability to metabolize painful emotional states is enhanced by communicating with a safe enough other person. Before we get into the next subchapter on page 54, I find it very interesting how we all just had this conversation about this last night with the ancestors and I, and those that were tuning into my live stream that I did last night, where we were talking about just this acceptance and this ability to receive compassion and empathy for within, and it was stretched so far beyond without. But the senses of being vulnerable is so, you know, constrained. But it opens up so many pathways and blockages within the individual by the acts of being vulnerable with what I say is with people, individuals, and groups who care about your process of life just as you care about their process of life too, right? We know that it's kind of not okay to be vulnerable with just anyone, right? We're talking about with individuals who care about your process in life in groups, right? Those family members who check up on you, who actually um, care about your planning and your process of life. These are the groups and people that you should be vulnerable with. If there's no one in your family and friends that you can be vulnerable with, all right, due to million other levels of reasons, then there are always groups, right? Always groups of people sharing. As a matter of fact, he was just saying that it is the best way to release, right? Is having understanding of oneself and understanding other people's experiences through group work. Okay, so we're on page 54 and we're 35 minutes into the stream. Don't forget to like the stream. Look into the description for more information, right? I should have my group in Facebook attached within the description as well if you're interested in um, group, right? They're like group therapy, group healing, group, um, you know, communication, group releasing, group sharing. I have a recharge and support and healing from abuse Facebook group that's been going on for a while now, several years. So go ahead and click on that description in the in the description box. All right, so the next subchapter is titled Finding Good Enough Relational Help. In chapter 13, I provide guidance about how to shop for a good enough therapist. I also explore more deeply the principles of therapeutic relational healing to help you know what is reasonable to expect from your therapist. I have also met a number of survivors who have been lucky enough to get this kind of relational healing from a partner or a friend, typically one who had good enough parents or who has a lot of recovery. Finally, attachment theorists have developed the concept of earned secure attachment to describe the recovered enough state where the attachment disorder of CPTSD becomes sufficiently healed. This is typically evidenced by the survivor forming at least one supportive and reliable enough relationship. Many of the successful therapists I have guided come to an end when the client gains and earns secure relationship outside of our therapy. This is typically a partner or best friend with whom the person can truly be themselves. Another potential sources of relational healing is the co-counseling relationship. Guidelines for creating a co-counseling relationship are also contained in chapter 13. So let's put a pin in this one, right? Because as the author is saying, that even forms of relationship through a partner or family or friend that you can be oneself with, that you can be vulnerable with, right? Will just naturally allow for the therapist to dissipate, right? Naturally. So some people can find that voice, that safety net within a partnership. Okay. An individual who cares. All right, moving on. Many respondents to my website have reported glowingly about the help they get from others through online recovery groups and forums. These groups can be particularly helpful for those who still find it difficult to be vulnerable in person. Sometimes the distance and relative anonymity of these forums can decrease the fear of self disclosure, and this in turn can enhance therapeutic relating. An increasing number of therapists also seem to be offering telephone sessions for the same reason. The section Finding an Online Group in Chapter 13 lists recommended online groups. Next subchapter on page 55 is titled Parent Dichotomy and Relational Healing. I have worked with many clients who began therapy with me while they were still over controlled by their traumatizing parents, both externally as well as internally. Sometimes the control was enforced by as little as one phone call a week. Not infrequently, these clients were also being overpowered and or abandoned in relationships as abusive and neglectful as the ones they had with their parents. This is repetition compulsion and it's most destructive as it strands survivors in experiencing the worst of both worlds. Through in depth exploration of their childhood trauma, many of my still trapped clients achieve psychological freedom from their parents for the first time in their lives. Once again, this was a freedom that they had not actually achieved, even though they had been living on their own for decades. These clients gradually learn to live more successfully on their own without their parents, over controlling, spoiling influence. Their ability to build self nurturing relationships with themselves almost always correlated with a major reduction or complete severing of their relationship with their parents. Let me reread that again. Their ability to build self nurturing relationships with themselves almost always correlated with a major reduction or complete severing of their relationships with their parents. I'm gonna put a pin in there because I just got a message, and some people are like, "Well, what if their parents have already transformed? What if they're like no longer here, experiencing the breath of life? How does one remove this psychological and physiological imbalance within if their parents or the guardians are not here, or if they're never even met their parents or guardians?" I want to see if the author actually touches on that experience, or because there is more than one way to sever relationships psychologically and physiologically from parents you never met, guardians you never had, and those that have already transformed. I just want to see if the author talks about that. So let's continue. He says that my client Joe, who was variously misdiagnosed as schizoid, Asperger's, and paranoid, was living alone when he began therapy with me. He was extremely shut down and self contained, but recognized himself as a freeze type from reading articles on my website. Getting him to talk at first was like pulling teeth, but over time I discovered that he was engaged in daily phone contact with his narcissistic, emasculating mother. Through our work and tremendous courage on his part, he gradually reduced the phone contact with his mother. At first, to once a week, then once a month, then only major holidays, and after a few years, to almost never. When a parent is unrelentingly toxic, hearing even a few words from them can trigger the survivor into an intense emotional flashback. I have worked with numerous clients who made very little progress in their recovery while they maintained contact with the toxic parent. For this reason, such clients usually require a parent dichotomy to progress. There is a classic book by Bob Hoffman on this topic entitled Getting Divorced from Mother and Dad. Make sure you guys put a pin in this, okay? The author is giving us so much reliable resources, all right? He said that there is a classic book by Bob Hoffman with two F's on this topic entitled Getting Divorced from Mother and Dad. As external freedom from smoother mothering, oh, I'm sorry, as external freedom from smother mothering continued, Joe gradually achieved more and more internal freedom from her. During this time, he began to experience the first meaningful relationship of his life in an ACA group that for many years provided him with a great deal of positive companionship and relational healing. Joe finally concluded therapy with me when a healthy primary relationship that he formed with a group member reached the 2 year mark. Next subchapter on page 56 is titled Learning to Handle Conflict in a Relationship. But let's go back a little bit more when the author was saying that when you have parents that are ultimately toxic, right? Even just hearing a few words can send a person to flashback. I myself experienced that, and I reached to the point where when I feel the tone, when I hear the information of toxicity, I hang up on them in their face automatically with no remorse because I feel like, you know, and I know that they're not listening. What they're doing are projecting their issues, right? And once I repeat myself one time and I know you're not listening, and I hear the tone, the transformation in your voice of negativity of like a demon, not like it is, I hang up the phone right then and there, click. A few moments, I'll say, talk to you another time. That's happened a couple times. And guess what? Their tone changes. The next time when we do speak, it's more of an understanding from that individual. Because once I hear and see of that flashback of the demonic figure, I hang up on your face automatically. Click. I'm not going to sit there and take abuse. So I say that y'all just, you know, put your foot down, create boundaries. Sometimes people love to cross your boundaries and right then and there disconnect. Right then and there disconnect. It works because if they want to have a relationship with you, they will change their behavior, they will change their demeanor. If not, then like the author suggests, you speak to them less and less and less and less, right? Sometimes it's like years, or sometimes it's never. I've experienced that with some estranged people in my family. They talk to their relatives like never because of the flashbacks and the toxic shame that they experience in their childhood development, that it is better for them to not even build a connection in their adulthood. So they become avoidant. But let's move on to the next subchapter titled Learning to Handle Conflict in Relationship on page 56. One caveat for recovering the ability to authentically be yourself, that it is unreasonable and unfair to expect anyone to accept you if you are being abusively angry or contemptuous. Some trauma survivors flash back into this type of behavior by acting out from their outer critic. If this is an issue for you, Chapter 10 provides guidance for deconstructing this intimacy destroying habit. In this vein, it is important to note that intimacy does not mean unconditional love. As John Gottman's scholarly research shows, a certain amount of disagreement, disaffection, and disappointment is normal in relationship. The hallmark of successful couples is their ability to handle feelings of anger and hurt in a constructive and civil way. Gottman's studies have identified this as a key characteristic of couples who still really like each other after 10 years. Quote, tools for lovingly resolving conflict, unquote, is a pragmatic list of techniques and perceptives to help couples resolve disruptions in their mutual attunement. Moreover, books by the Gottmans and Sue Johnson provide a great deal of practical help. I also find that Beyond the Marriage Fantasy by Dan Beaver is especially helpful for men. Beyond the Marriage Fantasy by Dan Beaver. Next subchapter, Reparenting, page 57. Reparenting is a key aspect of relational healing. It is primarily a process of addressing the many developmentally arrested needs of the traumatized child that we were. In this book, we repeatedly address the two most fundamental of these needs: love and protection. Quote, suggested intentions for recovery, unquote, renders yet another picture of the diverse developmental arrests that many as yet be unaddressed in the CPTSD survivor. The toolbox presents these needs as tangible goals that we can use to direct our recovery efforts. So when he's saying a toolbox, there's like many references of toolboxes here, and he's saying toolbox one is in chapter 16 in regards to reparenting, right? So he's saying that reparenting is a key aspect of relational healing. It is primarily a process of addressing the many developmentally arrested needs of the traumatized child that we were. So, and that goes back to my point of reference when I was talking about, like, what if, you were a foster child? What if you were adopted? What if you never knew your parents? And, or what if your parents have already transformed? So the author has given us ways through toolboxes, right? For suggested intentions for recovery in that same vein. He says that the toolbox presents these needs as tangible goals that we can use to direct our recovery effects. And eventually we'll get to chapter 16, eventually. Okay, in reparenting, what I find for myself, reparenting, um, I don't know. I think I've always been a stronghold. Um, Yeah. As far as reparenting, like honestly, I've discovered a long time that we are our parents uniquely. Um, what I like to delve into with reparenting is receiving all the wisdom, resources, and the highlights from the highest ability of my parents, right? Their skills, their talents, like utilizing those, seeing those as concrete elements within me that I have the opportunity to uplift, right? To hand down, right? To all of my environments is, everyone's parents or guardian has a crown, right? You know, that purple influence surrounding their headspace. And now, if a person was able to perceive that from their parents or not, but they all have some form of highest altitudes that they are here, you know, maybe it's the power of their words. Maybe they have some skills and talents in authoring. I don't know. Maybe they have some skills and talents somewhere, right? Every parent has that, no matter if they're addicts or not. They have some highest ability, all right, within them that a child can possibly perceive. That T Bon Ange is what we talk about in our voodoo tarot cards, that little big angel. Every parent has that aspect, all right? So utilizing those forms as aspects at their highest ability is what they have passed down to you. What are you passionate about today? What are you working towards, these days? Like, how are you giving back to yourself? How are you giving back to your environment? All stems from your DNA, even if they were addicts. All right, you guys. So we are going to read a couple more summaries here in chapter 3, Improving Relationships by Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. And the next subchapter is titled Self Mothering and Self Fathering. So now you heard my opinion on how I reparent, right, in my mind. Okay, now the author is giving you substantial ways of reparenting, self mothering, and self fathering. Let's see what he says. An important yin yang dynamic of reparenting involves balancing self mothering and self fathering. When a child's mothering needs are adequately met, self compassion is installed at the core of her being. When the same is true of her fathering needs, self protection also becomes deeply embedded. Ashe, yes. Self compassion is the domicile of recovery, and self protection is its foundation. When self compassion is sufficiently established as a home base to return to in difficult times, an urge to be self protective naturally arises from it. Oh my goodness gracious. We were talking about that again last night, you guys. Sorry to keep interrupting in this chapter. Let's reread that. Self compassion is the domicile of recovery, and self protection is its foundation. When self compassion is sufficiently established as a home base to return to in difficult times, an urge to be self protective naturally arises from it. Protecting your peace is what I'm saying. The author goes on to say that living in the world without access to these primal instincts of survival is truly terrifying. We advance our recovery process immeasurably when we commit to remothering and refathering ourselves. I encourage you now to commit to becoming an unshakable source of compassion and protection for yourself. Okay, we were so talking about that last night. That's why Urza Lee came up with that fiery sense, because she knows nothing but protection, and she will protect her peace. La Baleen, that mothering, natural, nurturing, overbearing, was there as well in our reading last night, to ultimately, for you to receive compassion, ultimately you will receive protection through your compassions, as Ursula fiercely shine through all of the Congo, right? Through her petrol sense that she will protect. She will create a safety net. All right, so let's get into the subchapter of self mothering grows self compassion. Oh, there's only a few more pages, you guys. Only a few more pages left, right in chapter 3. But I think we're still going to end it, um, pretty soon, so we don't go too much over an hour, because there's literally only 4 pages left before we get into chapter 4. So let's stay right where we are in improving relationships. Self mothering grows self compassion. Let's hear what the author has to say. The most essential task of self mothering is building a deeply felt sense that we are lovable and deserve to be loved. Self mothering is the practice of loving and accepting the inner child in all phases of his mental, emotional, and physical experience. If inner child is a problematic concept for any reason, you can imagine nurturing the developmentally arrested part of yourself. Self mothering is based on the precept that unconditional love is every child's birthright. Recovering from the loss of unconditional love is problematic. Not getting enough of it as children was the greatest loss we had. Sadly, this loss can never be completely remediated, because unconditional love is only approximate and developmentally helpful during the first 2 years or so of life. After this time, the toddler has to begin to learn that human love comes from some conditions. Although love still needs to be copious at this time, the child must be gently shown that behaviors like hitting, biting, and breaking things are not acceptable. The period of conditional love has begun and is successfully guided via a very gradual increase in learning about necessary and healthy limits and rules. The toddler who receives good enough parenting learns relatively easy to survive the very gradually diminishing supply of unconditional love. He said, the very gradually diminishing supply of unconditional love. During this time, she learns little by little that other people also have rights and needs. Her absolute entitlement to gratification is coming to an end, and the needs of her parents will not always be forfeited to accommodate her. Once again, psychological health is based on having about 2 years of this no questions asked entitlement to unconditional love. It is the normal, healthy narcissism that Freud describes as his majesty, the baby. Let's read that last line again. It is the normal, healthy narcissism that Freud described as, quote, his majesty, the baby, unquote. Serious problems occur, however, when the toddler does not begin to learn that there are limits to his original entitlement. If there are no limits for too long, then the journey towards adult narcissism begins. On the other hand, if there are too many limits too soon, the matrix of trauma begins to form. Enlightened parents introduce limits slowly but surely. They do it at such a rate that by the time the child reaches adolescence, he can balance satisfying his needs with helping his intimates to satisfy theirs. He learns to be sharing, reciprocal, a developmental task that is essential to keeping intimacy alive in his life. CPTSD is a syndrome of the dearth of unconditional love, or what the great therapist Carl Rogers called, quote, unconditional positive regard, unquote. CPTSD can also occur when unconditional love is shut off in all or nothing way in early childhood. Some parents can shower love on babies, but as soon as a child begins toddling around and expressing a will of her own, they become severely punishing and rejecting. And we're just going to read this final subchapter in chapter 3, Improving Relationships, titled The Limits of Unconditional Love, on page 59. Ooh, these are all so good. So good. The Limits of Unconditional Love. The terrible absence of love or its abrupt premature termination is extremely painful, and its loss is very difficult to address. We cannot help desperately wanting the unconditional love we were so unfairly deprived of, but we cannot, as adults, expect others to supply our unmet early entitlement needs. The one exception to this is therapy, but that, of course, is usually only 1 or 2 hours a week. Miraculously, I have seen that unconditional positive regard of the therapist be enough on numerous occasions to significantly repair the damage of not being parentally loved. And when it is enough, the therapist's consistent caring facilitates the awakening of the developmentally arrested need to hold yourself with enough unconditional love. We survivors often struggle with managing our understandable but unrealistic yearnings to receive permanent unconditional love from a friend or parent. Like the toddler, we eventually have to accept the limits of adult love. This is especially true in romance, where the intoxication of unconditional love rarely lasts more than a year. Around this time, partners inevitably began to feel some frustration with each other because of differences in their individual needs. Nonetheless, romantic love can be a significant source of therapeutic unconditional like love, especially when it survives the inevitability of some disappointment. Susan Campbell's A Couple's Journey is a pragmatic research based book on how to reap more intimacy out of normal relationship disappointments. They forgot the period. That's funny. He forgot the period at the end of the chapter. But anyway, that concludes the subchapter, The Limits of Unconditional Love. And when we come back next week, we're going to talk about subchapters Inner Child Work, Reparenting Affirmations, Self Fathering, and Time Machine Rescue Operation. Wait a minute. Obviously, this author understands the reciprocal levels of as above, so below, right? He has a subtitle chapter, Self Fathering and Time Machine Rescue Operation. Now, if Saturn is not the father of time, Saturn is the father of time. And I just love how he utilizes fathering and time machine together, acknowledging the heavens above, forming the planes here below. Another subchapter is Reparenting by Committee, the Tao of Self Relating and Relating to Others. And that will get us to chapter 4, right? So next week we'll be able to read some parts of chapter 4. But for now, we're going to conclude this Surviving to Thriving live reading, chapter 3, Improving Relationships. So I want everyone to at least comment what stood out to you the most in this chapter so far. Is it the reparenting, learning to handle conflicts, finding good enough relational help, healing the shame that binds us in loneliness, the origin of social anxiety? Which one spoke to you the most? All right, so we're going to end on page 60 here and we'll pick it up next week. And not to keep you guys even further, thank you for being here and experiencing these present, very much powerful now moments that we all have attainment to rise and uplift oneself and others. If you feel like this information is relatable, thumbs up the video, sub to the channel, as all of my workings are one whole form of balance here. Okay, as you can see, our reading from last night was a direct information to what's coming from this chapter. All right, my words of power is what we do during the week. On the weekends, we get into Voodoo Tarot, and all of it stretches out to this reciprocal nature of having a divine connection with oneself through the acts of your ancestors. and also through, with reading Pete Walker, which is like a divine intervention, a book that I discovered at the thrift store weeks ago, which helps tie all of this unique ability to be right here, right now. Okay. Um, I always reiterate and go back to say that the stats has not changed over years, that 1 in 3 women and girls will be SA'd before 18, and 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 boys will be SA'd before the age of 16 or 18. I apologize, you guys. I don't know why 16 is standing out. Before the age of adulthood of 18, 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 boys, and 1 in 3 girls, right, will be SA'd before they become adults at 18. And this is why this work is so much present. Okay. And this is why all this work ties together, because I know a lot of boys and girls, all right, especially at my age where I'm right now. I know many. Not only that, I was just speaking to a woman through my clarity call the other day, and I forget how we got on it. Oh man, we had got on a topic of her being raped, right? How her family had, according to her, not allow her to experience life. They were very strict. They didn't have TV. They didn't have a radio. So she was kind of like clueless when she was 18. She was like into everything, but she ended up getting raped, and she pretty much blamed her parents because they kept her in a box or whatever. But I tried to express to her that was not her parents' intent. It was totally the person that did the raping who is to blame, not her parents. Not only that, additionally, she goes to say that she was violated as well as a child. So the more I, talk about my groups, healing oneself, healing the universe, healing environment, so many people have their own story. So we will never stop. All right. We will continue to reach and refurbish the top of that crown to reach as many people as possible, because we don't need celebrities to come out and talk about their forms of abuse. All you have to do is look within you, look to the left and look to the right, and people are experiencing these issues with CPTSD as well. You don't have to wait for a celebrity to talk about it. All you need to do is look within you, look within the left and the right of you, because everybody is experiencing this somewhat toxic being. And we are here to dismantle it all by bringing the power awareness, the acceptance of I am. And not only that, speaking up and speaking out. Very important to speak up and to speak out. Because when one person abuse, right, or SA, they are doing it to 10 other people. So it is important that this work continues.